Let us sit together in silence for 15 minutes and then we'll start our discussion. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sammasambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sammasambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sammasambuddhassa. Buddham dhammam sangham namasami. My dear friends, this is the weekly Sutta study offered by Dhammadharini. And this week, we will be looking at the Alagaddūpama Sutta, which is number 22 in the middle length discourses. If you have this book, I'm going to summarize the setup story, and we will begin with the section on the simile of the snake, which is on page 227. Somebody in the room may use this book if you'd like to read along. This sutta comes along because last Tuesday, we were having a conversation about anatta, or non-self, and how the Buddha's teachings are comparing to some of the other philosophies that were known of during his time. And a very interesting dialogue came along about the what exactly the Buddha was saying about anatta. This sutta here is contains a very profound teaching on that theme. At the beginning of the sutta, the part that I'm summarizing, there's a particular monk, Aritta, who comes to the opinion that engaging in sensuality should not be considered an obstruction. So sensuality here, kama, is a polite word for sex. And what they say in the commentary is that Aritta was thinking, well, sometimes the monks receive delicious food with a wonderful taste and a wonderful smell. And it's not an obstacle if we mindfully and with a clear comprehension use those delicious and pleasant foods. And sometimes the monks see things that are very lovely, lovable, and beautiful. And also, it's not an obstacle to see beautiful things, like a scenery or visiting a house, and they have a lovely house with lovely furniture and so on like that. And so the monk, Aritta, thinks, well, if these sense pleasures are okay, maybe the pleasure of being with a woman is also okay. The other monks heard him express this idea, and they challenged him about it and mentioned many different teachings and metaphors that the Buddha had used, which are the opposite to that. But Aritta still stubbornly held on to his idea. This same story comes about as the background story of one of the Vinaya rules. And it's given as an example that this stubborn and argumentative holding on to opinions is a fault. And we do see that this is kind of the part of the deeper aspect of the Buddha's philosophy, that one cannot know the truth only by logic, and one cannot discover the truth by speculative thinking, which is based on an incorrect premise. However, the Buddha did not avoid logic. Many of the teachings that he gives are extremely logical. And he does, follow certain basic teachings and then extrapolates from there the conclusions that you could take from that. The difference is that the ultimate test of what the Buddha is teaching is whether it's conducive to our true welfare and benefit, leading to the destruction of the internal defilements and leading to our ultimate liberation and escape from the cycle of rebirth. So just because something is logical doesn't make it worth bothering with, and doesn't make it something that you should hold on to. A little bit more, just a background about that philosophy. An essential part of the Buddha's teaching is letting go of everything, letting go of clinging and attachment to anything at all. So having a clinging attachment to views and opinions is not the way. And that's also going to be developed here in this sutta. After the monks tried to convince Ayya, they took him to the Buddha, and the Buddha clarified, quizzed him again. It's what the Buddha always does when somebody complains to the Buddha and says, that person did this bad thing. The Buddha never condemns him without first inquiring and questioning, is that really true? Is that what you said? Is that what you think? Finding out that Ayya had this idea, he clarified that it's impossible to engage in sensuality without having sensual desires and sensual thoughts. Now I'm going to open up the sutta, and I'm going to share the screen so that you can read along with me. The version that I'm reading from is the published version from Wisdom Publications through their website called wisdomexperience.org. And a few of their ebooks, including the middle-length discourses, are available for free. And it's one of the nicest presentations of the book for those who like to read online. So here comes the simile of the snake. Here, bhikkhus, some misguided men learn the Dhamma, discourses, stanzas, expositions, verses, exclamations, sayings, birth stories, marvels, and answers to questions. But having learned the Dhamma, they do not examine the meaning of these teachings with wisdom. Not examining the meaning of those teachings with wisdom, they do not gain a reflective acceptance of them. Instead, they learn the Dhamma only for the sake of criticizing others and for winning in debates, and they do not experience the good for the sake of which they learn the Dhamma. Those sutta, those 9 kinds of teachings. This is before the collection of the Pali Canon had been gathered up into the suttas, the Abhidhamma, the Vinaya, with the different books, the different collections among the suttas. They had a different way of classifying them. Sutta is a discourse spoken by the Buddha. Agaya is a discourse given in verse. Vyakarana is an explanatory discourse without verses. Agata is, Gaya is a sutta which is a mixture of text and verses. And then Agata is a teaching which is just the verse, like the Dhammapada or the Terigata. Then the Udana is an inspired utterance of the Buddha, like, for example, in the Udana or the Itivutaka. And then Itivutaka stands for any teaching that starts with the introduction statement, thus it was said, this is what I heard. So that's, it's not central to the point of today's discussion, but you may like to know that. So then the Buddha is saying that examining with wisdom and reflective acceptance is part of the right grasp of the teachings. If you fail to do that, just memorize the teachings to used as an argument point. That's the wrong grasp. Another way of thinking of it is in order to take the teachings on board, first good step is to show up to hear the suttas, or show up to read the suttas, listen or read with an open mind, which is clear and ready to receive the teachings. And then you might have considered whether the teacher who's giving you the teachings is reliable or not. If it's a living person, you might examine their ethical behavior, see whether their behavior is the same in public or in private, seeing whether their behavior is the same if they get a lot of praise and fame, or the same whether there's somebody who's humble and not known. Then, having heard the teaching, you should memorize the teaching. So learn it first, and then having memorized it, then try it out in your own life and compare it with your own experience. See whether you're able to match up the ideas that are given in the teaching with what you actually experience for yourself. And then if you can make that match and start to integrate it, then you can try practicing the teachings, practicing the guidance that's given. And you can observe, is this leading me to an increase of my hindrances and obstructions and defilements? Or is it leading to purification? Is it leading to becoming more miserable, or leading to becoming more free from suffering? And so in that way, if the Dhamma is making you miserable, then you should think, I've probably got it the wrong way. I've done a wrong grasp of the teachings, like getting the wrong end of the snake. And I should discuss with somebody or rethink it, find a different way to take hold of, to understand the import of these teachings. And now comes the simile. Suppose a man needing a snake, seeking a snake, wandering in search of a snake, saw a large snake and grasped its coils or its tail. It, the snake, would turn back on him and bite his hand or his arm or one of his limbs. And because of that, he would come to death or deadly suffering. Why is that? Because of the wrong grasp of the snake. So too, here, some misguided men learn the Dhamma wrongly. Why is that? Because of the wrong grasp of those teachings. Then he mentions the right way. Because some clansmen learn the Dhamma, discourses, answers to questions, and so on. Having learned the Dhamma, they examine the meaning of those teachings with wisdom. Examining the meaning of those teachings with wisdom, they gain a reflective acceptance of them. They do not learn the Dhamma for the sake of criticizing others and winning in debates. And they experience the good for the sake of which they learned the Dhamma. These teachings, being rightly grasped, conduce to their welfare and happiness for a long time. Why is that? Because of the right grasp of those teachings. Suppose a man needing a snake, seeking a snake, wandering in search of a snake, saw a large snake and caught it rightly with the cleft stick, and having done so, grasped it rightly by the neck. Then, although the snake might wrap its coils around his hand or his arm or limbs, still he would not come to death or deadly suffering because of that. Why is that? Because of his right grasp of the snake. So too here, some clansmen learn the Dhamma. Why is that? Because of the right grasp of those teachings. Therefore, bhikkhus, when you understand the meaning of my statements, remember accordingly. And when you do not understand the meaning of my statements, then either ask me about it or those bhikkhus who are wise. I'd like to now ask you if you can think of any examples of taking the right grasp or the wrong grasp of the Dhamma. And what do you think, since the Buddha taught us not to cling to anything, why is he talking about grasping the Dhamma? Okay, who has an answer? Raise your hand if you know the answer, or if you have anything to comment. Okay. Hey. Yes.
Hello.
Jonathan.
Hi. Hello, Ayya. Yeah, so I guess the things that I start thinking of, right, like when translating, like the difference between like monastics and lay people, right? Like I think of, I mean, like the precepts for me are like to not cause harm with my sexuality versus not be sexual at all. And I guess like there's like a bit, I mean, like I guess like like what I believe is like the right teaching is like just not doing anything, like not using pornography, like not, you know, like any kind of sexuality that will cause harm. And then otherwise, but it's still like, you know, like, and it's like, I still see like the truth of suffering, even when I'm practicing like non-harmful sexuality, which is kind of a bummer in ways. But the other thing about like grasping the Dhamma, I know like, man, like, I don't know, like, I don't know if I mean, I guess that's like the last form of attachment, right? I mean, like if I'm like grasping at the Dhamma, and that's like, I don't know, I guess from my perspective, I would see it as preferable to be grasping at like the teachings, whatever, versus like worldly graspings. And maybe that's just a matter of perspective. But anyways, anything about that?
Thank you. That's definitely true that grasping after wealth or fame or comfort, those kind of things is not going to take you as far as grasping or holding on to the teachings, as especially when we've not, for that part that we've not yet realized truly for ourselves. Then we can take the guidance that we've read about in the suttas and really make the effort to work with that again and again and again until gradually the true meaning of it emerges. Some of the teachings are so subtle. When I was first starting in the Dhamma, I read the 12 steps of dependent origination, and it was like, who knows what, it was just like very mysterious how that particular teaching fitted together. But because of where I was staying, we just recited it every day. Every morning we recited it. And so then, like gradually, like at first, like one of the steps or two of the steps, started to come together and to become meaningful in a personal way. And so when we don't truly have it realized within ourselves, then we rely on what's been handed down to us. One way that I see the Dhamma is sometimes grasped in a bad way is when Westernized scholars have a disparaging attitude towards traditional Buddhism, and they think that like the Buddhist monks don't really understand what they're talking about, and that traditional Buddhism is just, I don't know what, superstitious or something, and then they think that they can go back to the text of the early teachings and come up with their own original idea, and nobody else has this idea, nobody else agrees with us, but they have their original idea. And I guess to get a PhD or something, it's good to have an original thesis. And so they're using the sutta to sort of get ahead in academia by being iconoclastic, and that's just like not like relevant. So a person who is studying the Dhamma and practicing the Dhamma for their own personal understanding, that is another aspect of it.
Thank you.
Any other comments on this before we go on? Okay, Richard. You're muted.
Sorry. Hello. Although one might think that grasping in and of itself is negative, but here very specifically, Buddha points out that there is right grasping as opposed to wrong grasping, and you need the snake's venom to make medicine. So that's why you want to grab the snake in the right way so that you can get the venom to make the medicine to heal yourself or somebody else, whatever. In this case, though, it's normally to heal yourself. So I think there's an interesting point, though, about the beginning of the sutta, where Arita is described as formerly of the vulture killers. This is a bad translation. He's actually a hawk trainer or a falcon trainer. In other words, he's like a royal falconer or a royal hawk trainer. And if you look carefully at the Pali and go in, you'll see that that's the actual description. I think it became, maybe over time, accustomed to think of him as a vulture killer, because it sounds like a very low class, thing in India. So he's kind of like a dumb person from the low class, and that's why he can't quite grasp, the Buddhist teaching. But in reality, he was actually a more higher class person. But anybody can misunderstand things. And another thing too is the way the translation comes off. Buddha initially, he almost sounds kind of like mean to Arita. And he says that I will discuss this with the monks, and then you will be known by your view, right? But actually, if you look at the Pali, right, it's not that he's going to be known by his view, right? It's that he will come to understand the mistake of his view, okay? So it's not a condemnation. The Buddha doesn't, condemn him or wish him any ill health or any ill will, or something like that. He wants to help him to overcome this, wrong view that he has, so he can move forward. And it's because if you notice in the beginning, when he first talking to him and explains a few things, Arita ends up all, depressed and slumped over and everything. So out of compassion to him, right, he says, okay, I'm going to discuss this with the monks. And then he shows them basically, I don't think we got there yet, but that you're not the body, you're not the khandhas, you're not the senses, and things like that. To relieve him of those views, which is causing him to come to this wrong view. And there's a famous thing you see once in a while in the suttas where Buddha says, some go too far and some don't go far enough. And this is an example of a person going too far. They take a little bit of knowledge of the Buddha and they extrapolate out this idea, which is really opposing. And you can see this like later in the development of the Mahayana. This happened in a lot of philosophical cases where they took these things that Buddha was teaching to help free yourself from thinking of the body, etc., as the self, to form is emptiness and emptiness is form. Buddha never teaches that, like in the Heart Sutta, you know what I mean? And things like that. He teaches you what emptiness is, but emptiness to the Buddha is you go from village life to the monastery, because then you don't have all the hustle and bustle of the village. Then you go from the monastery out to the forest, because then you don't have the distractions and things of the monastery. Then you go to the forest to just focusing the mind, down gazing at the earth, either while you're walking or standing or sitting, right, in meditation, to remove all the distraction of the forest, and then you enter into the jhanas, etc.
Yeah, that's a whole other subject.
So, but my point is that many things can be misunderstood. So, like in that case, people think that particular sutra they're talking about kasina meditation on earth. No, that's not. It's removing, just getting away until there's nothing left but just where your gazes fall away, in your practice of mindfulness. Anyways, yeah, maybe I spoke a little too long, but just thought it might be interesting.
The way that the Buddha scolded Arita, some kind of similar language to that appears in more than a dozen different places in the suttas. During my retreat, I happened to be looking at it because I was concerned about how one person can harm another person. Of course, if I insulted somebody, if that person was an innocent child, that child could be traumatized and actually be psychologically harmed by my insult. But if that person is an enlightened arahant, my insults won't hurt them at all. So it depends on the individual to what extent they might actually take a harm if I did something with the intention of harm. But we know that the definition of what's skillful and non-skillful is about reducing the asavas, reducing the taints, reducing the defilements. And that's expressed in a sort of like an impersonal, generic way. So it's not like me and my defilements or you and your defilements. It's just skillful behavior reduces the defilements. But there's one thing that the Buddha said, I did this for the welfare and benefit of gods and humans, which is having realized this Dhamma, I taught the Dhamma. And then what you monks can do, which is for the welfare and benefit of gods and humans of the whole world, is to fully understand the accurate meaning of the Dhamma that I'm teaching you, and to convey that in a correct way to the world. And the most worst thing that you can do, which is going to be for the harm of the whole world, is to misunderstand my teachings and to teach them in an incorrect way. It's for this reason, I think, that many good monks tend to be modest in the way that they present the Dhamma. They don't go far afield from what's given in the text, and they're very clear in distinguishing, ideas that may be like later on ideas or something from their own experience, which is not, and then linking it back to what's really in the text, and taking a big view where you don't just read one sutta or one phrase and try to take off with that, but you read a lot and listen to a lot and try to put together, you see everything that fits together in the Dhamma teachings. And that is part of getting the right grasp of the Dhamma, I think. Let's go on and read a little bit more. I'm going to read the simile of the raft. Bhikkhus, I shall show you how the Dhamma is similar to a raft, being for the purpose of crossing over, not for the purpose of grasping. Listen and attend closely to what I shall say. Yes, Venerable Sir, the Bhikkhus replied. The Blessed One said this, Bhikkhus, suppose a man in the course of a journey saw a great expanse of water, whose near shore was dangerous and fearful, and whose further shore was safe and free from fear, but there was no ferry boat or bridge for going to the far shore. Then he thought, there is this great expanse of water whose near shore is dangerous and fearful, and whose further shore is safe and free from fear, but no ferry boat or bridge for going to the far shore. Suppose I collect grass, twigs, branches, and leaves and bind them together into a raft, and supported by the raft and making an effort with my hands and feet, I got safely across to the far shore. And then that man collected the grass, twigs, branches, leaves, bound them together into a raft, supported by the raft, making an effort with his hands and feet, he got safely across to the far shore. Then, when he had got across and had arrived at the far shore, he might think thus, this raft has been very helpful to me, since supported by it and making an effort with my hands and feet, I got safely across to the far shore. Suppose I were to hoist it on my head or load it on my shoulder and then go wherever I want. Now, Bhikkhus, what do you think? By doing so, would that man be doing what should be done with that raft? No, Venerable Sir. By doing what would that man be doing what should be done with the raft? Here, Bhikkhus, the man has got across. He thinks the raft has been helpful to me. So on, I safely got across the shore. Suppose I were to haul it onto the dry land or set it adrift in the water and then go wherever I want. Now, Bhikkhus, it is by so doing that man would be doing what should be done by the raft. So I have shown you how the Dhamma is similar to a raft, being for the purpose of crossing over, not for the purpose of grasping. Because when you know the Dhamma is similar to a raft, you should abandon even the teachings, how much more so things contrary to the teachings. This passage has been misunderstood. In some traditions, well, I don't know if it's true or not, but I heard that in some of the Buddhist traditions, that took this to mean that you shouldn't cling to the teachings, but really it's saying the opposite, that you should cling to them while you're crossing the river. And then after you cross the river, you can put them down. Another part of this letting go is like if you're developing in meditation, if you're in the first jhana has certain factors, and then you let go of some of those factors in order to reach the second factor. And then you let go of some of the factors of the second jhana in order to reach the third jhana. And so in that way, the making progress in the Dhamma is involving, some things you pick up and then you subsequently have to let them go. One of the teachings about this is a controversy in meditation technique. Some teachers suggest noting that you use a word or a phrase to name the thing that you're experiencing, like hearing, touching, like that. And then other teachers say, well, later on, when you go to the second jhana, you would no longer be naming things with words. And so why build up a habit of noting? Because later on, you just want to let go of that habit. But while your mind is still distracted and not, connecting well with what you're trying to direct your awareness towards, then that process of naming could be useful to kind of like frame the thing that you're trying to attend to. So you can pick up some practices and some teachings temporarily, being willing to let them go. Oh, I see a wonderful hand up at the Aranya Bodhi Hermitage. Would you like to add something to this?
Yeah, so just a question, Ayya. First of all, thank you for the beautiful teaching today. I was wondering if you could make it really clear the difference between Silabhata Paramasa, which is a fetter, and clinging to the teachings until you cross the shore.
Okay, so the fetter, which is sometimes translated as clinging to precepts and vows, is sometimes in a way that's, I think, not quite correct or sort of shallow. They say that it means the fetter of clinging to superstitious beliefs or superstitious practices. But the Buddhist practices, by definition, are not superstitious, and therefore you can cling to the Buddhist practices which are not superstitious, but other religions, if you cling to those, it is superstitious. But I think it's much more authentic to think that even the Buddhist teachings could be clung onto in a superstitious way. So if you think that by morality alone, you're going to gain liberation, gain enlightenment, that's clinging to morality in a wrong way. That's a fetter. If you're clinging to rituals, like if you think that I would do 3 steps, 1 bow, and go from California to West Virginia.
Give some compression to the area. It can help your dog with stability.
Somebody's
as I said,
there. If you think you're going to do like a long Dhutanga practice, it comes out to like almost like self-mortification practice, thinking that by doing these extreme practices that's going to get you to enlightenment, then you've got it in a superstitious way, and that's a fetter. Can anybody think of a real example of something that they needed to cling to before, but that now they're able to let go of in their practice? Okay, Jonathan.
Yeah, I have one. I mean, it's not like directly related to Buddhist practice, but it's definitely something I had to cling to. Like I had like a really severe drug addiction, and so I was a 12-step member for like some time, and
Yeah.
like I had to like cling to that like I was in the ocean. Just like this parable is just so perfect for it, because like I was like drowning, and then when I reached the shore, and it's funny because like for me, like when I did reach the shore, you know, like because of some of it, it's like I was really still clinging to the raft. Like I was like, and now I'm finally at a place that now like Dhamma is like the thing that I now like follow, and that thing served its purpose, and now I can let it go, which is pretty great.
That's a really good example. And there actually is one sentence in the, it's a sutta called Chanting Together. That's kind of a summary of a lot of different things. And they talk about different ways of realizing enlightenment. There's the fast, easy way, the fast, difficult way, the slow, easy way, and the slow, difficult way. And the explanation of the slow, difficult way to attain enlightenment is somebody who's an addict, who's addicted to like a sex addict or something like that, but they cling to holding on to staying away from their addiction. And they go for years and years and years practicing as a monk. And all of that time they're crying because it's so difficult and challenging to not fall in with their addiction. But because of, you know, clinging in that way for a long time, then they are able to realize their full awakening and realize the full goal of the path. So it's like for each individual, and for some people, for whatever our karma or earlier lifetime, or the earlier in this lifetime, some of those negative habits fall away sort of easily, and then we don't have to focus on it so much. Yeah, that's a good example. Other examples of something in practice, like letting go of one thing, because you've there's a different aspect of the practice which is more important to pick up and focus on. Okay, we can go on, because I want to have time to get to the next section. Now, this is it's going to be developing towards the Buddha's teachings about self. Bhikkhus, there are these 6 standpoints for views. And standpoints for views is just referring to aspects of experience that one may cling to and identify with or not. What are the 6? Here, bhikkhus, an untaught, ordinary person who has no regard for noble ones and is unskillful and undisciplined in their Dhamma, who has no regard for true men and is unskilled and undisciplined in their Dhamma, meaning what they're teaching, they regard material form thus: this is mine, this I am, this is myself. He regards feeling: this is mine, this I am, this is myself. He regards perception: this is mine, this I am, this is myself. He regards formations: this is mine, this I am, this is myself. He regards what is seen, heard, sensed, cognized, encountered, sought, mentally pondered thus: this is mine, this I am, this is myself. And this is the standpoint of views. That's the first, though, this is the first one. So this first one, he's taking the first 4 of what's known as the 5 aggregates of clinging, form, feeling, perceptions, and volitional formations. The five aggregates, when clung to, are things that when people are clinging to this delusion about the self, this is very commonly what they're clinging to. And then the last of the five aggregates is consciousness or sense consciousness, which is the knowing faculty, which knows the experiences of the senses. And in this particular sutta, instead of using the word for consciousness or vijnana, he's mentioning the various kinds of objects that you would cognize with the vijnana. So it's pointing to the same thing in a different way. But regarding all of those objects, whatever is seen, heard, sensed, cognized, encountered, and then comes some more like mental objects, what might be sought, mentally pondered, as this is mine, this I am, this is myself. There's two basic kinds of what's called atta, or the self, as opposed to this anatta or non-self, which is the Buddha is teaching. There's a religious spiritual idea of this blissful, eternal, like a soul, blissful, unchanging, eternal, and merging with the divine, pure, not touched by any kind of evil deeds that we do, and so on, as a religious idea of the self. And then there's a more naturalistic idea of the self, which is simply when you look in the mirror, who is it? That's myself. You see yourself. So in this case, regarding the body, to pleasant, unpleasant feelings, the perception, meaning how we recognize or name the things that come into our experience, the formations, especially the volitional formations, what we are intending. When we see something, humans is a kind of an advanced animal, and the animals are involved all day long in doing things, like in getting something to eat, or taking a rest, or building a hut, or building a nest. And then humans are still constantly involved in doing things, but we've got this brain that's able to be more reflective, or have more ideas about what's happening. So this evolution, like everything that we experience, we say, what's it good for? What do I want with this? Is this good for me or bad for me? Can I use it? Or is it a danger? I want to get rid of it. That's like a big part of how these formations, the volitional formations, get built up. And then when all of the objects around in our world. So it could be like an object like, this is my computer, my monastery, my student, my teacher, my religion. Those are all like taking objects and converting them from things that are perfectly innocent, good, and harmless things by themselves. And I've suddenly made them into something that's extremely harmful when I start picking it up and making this added grasping and naming as like, this is mine. As soon as it's mine, then I have to, spend a lot of energy to keep it and not let anything happen to it. And then people may also feel the same way about the body, the physical body, the living body that they're occupying are like feelings, like if something is painful. Someone who regards it feeling as mine could be like really distressed and freaked out by things that are painful, or really overly elated and excited by things that are pleasant. And then, clinging to one's ambitions. We sometimes see monastic aspirants are people who are exploring the monastic form who come to us. And some of them are kind of like, I want to just see how this practice is, what the life is like, and go step by step and see if this is beneficial for me. And others come in, sometimes they know even less, and they say, I want to be a bhikkhuni. How many months does it take me to graduate so that I can be a bhikkhuni? And the person with that second view, they're grasping onto their ambition and neglecting the process. Right? So that's just a few examples of how some of the harms that can come from clinging to any of these things. And then when it comes to this is myself, this is a sort of a way where the ordinary, like natural clinging that can happen, this is sort of like naturalistic, it can merge over into a religious idea, where if I said, my body is a temple of God or something, and I have to treat my body in like this very sacred, holy way because God is in my body, or I'm not going to get much into making fun of religious ideas, but any one of these things, it can be in a way like sort of like elevated or developed and made into an elaborated doctrine, which then can be clung to. And the Buddha criticized both ideas, both the religious self and the naturalistic experience that we have where we regard something as self. He pointed out the danger. I'll just go on the second half of this section and then we can discuss. Because a well-taught noble disciple who has regard for noble ones, skilled and disciplined in their Dhamma, who has regard for true men, is skilled and disciplined in their Dhamma, regards material form thus. This is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. He regards feeling thus. This is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. He regards perception thus. This is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. He regards formations thus. This is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. He regards what is seen, heard, sensed, cognized, encountered, sought, mentally pondered thus. This is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. And this standpoint for views, that which is the self. Okay, so then that's the first standpoint, was about the five khandhas. Then there's a second standpoint. I forgot to read it up above. The second standpoint, and this is explicitly a religious idea that was contemporary with the Buddha. There's this other standpoint for views, namely, that which is the self is the world. After death, I shall be permanent, everlasting, eternal, not subject to change. I shall endure as long as eternity. And he regards this standpoint as this is mine, this I am, this is not myself. That's the untaught person. And then the well-taught person, here's this standpoint for views, okay? There is this standpoint for views, namely, that which is the self is the world. After death, I shall be permanent, everlasting, eternal, not subject to change. I shall endure as long as eternity. He regards this too as, this is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. This is exactly the point that Richard was bringing out in our conversation last Tuesday. The Buddha is not saying that idea about self from the world after death, I shall be permanent, everlasting, not subject to change. I shall endure as long as eternity. He doesn't go as far as saying that standpoint is false. That standpoint should be rejected. Instead, he simply suggests not having any attachment to that standpoint, not regarding that as my standpoint, not identifying with that standpoint. For myself, this teaching, Buddhism is not really about as much about what ideas you believe in as how you practice and whether the practice is leading to the long-term taming and calming down of all the agitation and dukkha. This, the next section is coming to this. Calming down our suffering, calming down our negativities, calming down our harmful impulses, clearing the way to where there's a space, like a clear space for insight to evolve. And then gradually, like the insight takes over. So then the letting go of those negativities and seeing more clearly or evolving hand in hand. And that's what's important, not the say, I believe in this. So saying, I believe in this is not what's going to get us there. It's what we practice with. I want to ask now if there are any questions about this section, about the standpoint for views, or any comments about that. Okay, we can go ahead. And the second part, agitation. When this was said, a certain bhikkhu asked the Blessed One, Venerable Sir, can there be agitation about what is non-existent externally? There can be bhikkhus. Here a bhikkhu, somebody thinks, alas, I had it. Alas, I have it no longer. Alas, may I have it. Alas, I do not get it. Then he sorrows, grieves, and laments. He weeps, beating his breast, and becomes distraught. This is how there's agitation about what is non-existent externally. So this is referring to like external possessions and objects and things that a person might have had at one time, and then because of impermanence, we can't keep them, they disappear. I used to have good eyesight. Alas, I no longer. I used to have good hearing. Alas, no longer. I used to have a strong body. Alas, no longer. I used to have money. Alas, no longer. Like that. So that's that. Then the second one, Venerable Sir, can there be no agitation about what is non-existent externally? There can be bhikkhus. The Blessed One said, here, bhikkhu, someone does not think this. Alas, I had it. I have it no longer. Alas, may I have it. Alas, I do not get it. Then he does not sorrow, grieve, and lament. He does not weep, beating his breast and becoming distraught. That is how there's no agitation about what is non-existent externally. So this is the quality of equanimity, being equal-minded. It's very close to Stoicism, that one trains the mind in various ways to get out of expecting external things to be a particular way and being distraught when they are not that way. And this is definitely an ongoing process, maybe a lifelong process. Then the second, Venerable Sir, can there be agitation about what is non-existent internally? There can be, because, and this is coming to the religious idea of the self. Someone has the view, that which is the self is the world after death. I shall be permanent, everlasting, eternal, not subject to change. I shall endure as long as eternity. He hears the Tathagata, or a disciple of the Tathagata, teaching the Dhamma for the elimination of all standpoints, decisions, obsessions, adherences, and underlying tendencies, for the stilling of all formations, for the relinquishment of all attachments, for the destruction of craving, for dispassion, for cessation, for nibbana. He thinks thus: so I shall be annihilated, I shall perish, I shall be no more. Then he sorrows, grieves, and laments. He weeps, beating his breast, and becomes distraught. That's how there is agitation about what is non-existent internally. That's the religious idea about the eternal self. Can there be no agitation about what is non-existent internally? There can be bhikkhus. Here, a bhikkhu, someone does not have the view that the self is the world and so on. I shall endure as long as eternity. He hears the Tathagata, or a disciple of the Tathagata, teaching the Dhamma for the elimination of all standpoints, decisions, obsessions, adherences, underlying tendencies, for the stilling of all formations, for the relinquishment of all attachments, for the destruction of craving, for dispassion, cessation, nibbana. He does not think thus: I will be annihilated, I will perish. So then he doesn't sorrow. I will say that this agitation, one of my ideas is that a core method of the working with the Four Noble Truths is about dukkha, or suffering. And anytime I suffer, I remember this teaching, and I think there's something there that I was clinging to and identifying with as myself. And I've got to use my yoniso manasikara, my clear comprehension, and as quickly as I can, find out what was I clinging to, and release and let go of that. And then experience the release and calming of that particular bit of suffering. Because you may well acquire a possession that is permanent, everlasting, eternal, not subject to change, and might endure as long as eternity. But do you see any such possession, bhikkhus? And he says, no. The bhikkhu said, no, sir. So good bhikkhus, I do not see any possession that is permanent, everlasting, eternal. And then he says, bhikkhus, you may well cling to that doctrine of a self that would not arouse sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair in one who clings to it. But do you see any such doctrine of self, bhikkhus? No, Venerable Sir. It's good because I too do not see any doctrine of self that would not arouse sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair in one who clings to it. Because you may well take as a support that view that would not arouse sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair in one who takes it as a support. But do you see any such support of views? No, sir. I too do not see any support of views. This is views that is involving identification that would not arouse sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. I'm going to go on just a little bit further and then we can discuss for a few minutes. Because there being a self, would there be for me what belongs to a self? Yes, Venerable Sir. Or there being what belongs to a self, would there be for me a self? Yes, Venerable Sir. Because since a self and what belongs to a self are not apprehended as true and established, then this standpoint for views, namely, that which is the self is the world, and after death I shall be permanent, everlasting, eternal, not subject to change, shall endure as long as eternity. Would it not be an utterly and completely foolish teaching? What else could it be, Venerable Sir, but an utterly and completely foolish teaching? And now he's going into a catechism about the five aggregates, but I just want to pause here and highlight that regarding the religious idea of self, the Buddha, as I understand this, is saying that developing and depending on that idea doesn't bring liberation. And he says a little bit further down, I tried to find a doctrine of self that would not cause suffering, and there was no such doctrine, and therefore I don't teach any such of a doctrine. Basically, there's several different classifications or lists of teachings about that, religious doctrines of the self that are held by the various schools. And the Buddha, I think, is saying it's not profitable to rely on those teachings. And then regarding what I'll call the natural self, he's pointing out that it is profitable to keep investigating. And when you investigate, you find out that the five aggregates are not, none of the five aggregates, you can't find the self in any of the aggregates because of their constantly changing nature. The more you let go of that identification with any of the five aggregates, and in this sutta, any of the objects of consciousness, consciousness itself, and any of the objects of self, let go of finding the self, and the natural self, and any of those things. Actually, the further you can go with that, the further you can reduce the amount of dukkha in life and come closer to clearing the space for the final destruction of the defilements and realization of awakening. So we haven't covered this entire sutta, but we've covered a part of it. Now I'm going to take your questions and comments, starting with Ananaya.
I'm not sure if I've missed it or if it's a little farther along, but there is something that, and this has to do with anxiety, like an existential, not like it is an existential anxiety. I became aware of this, over a year or so ago, probably. And it has to do with a human being, by virtue of birth, has an underlying anxiety of survival all the time. It's always there.
Yeah.
And at some point, if you continue along, you do realize that that is what it is, that it has no, there's not another basis for it, that it is an existential anxiety that comes because we're born, and the organism always searches and wants to sustain itself, wants to avoid being annihilated. That's just part of the gene, the gene pool, the DNA that we're born with. But it made a huge difference in watching that and seeing how it was in being experienced, what it felt like when it would arise, et cetera. And it's an ongoing process. That's not like something that's, I understood that and now it's gone away. It's still there. And then the other thing was, real quickly, is that if you go to Sutta Central, the link that you put in the email, that section, that last section, where the Buddha does go in and says very explicitly about the aggregates and the fetters, you come to this one section where it's the clearest thing I've ever seen about really getting the point that there is nothing in those aggregates. There is absolutely nothing. I mean, it's like a deeper level of, and he states it very, very clearly about that this does not exist. It isn't there. It's not yours. So I would just encourage, if others haven't read it yet, is to take the time to read that section.
Thank you, Anna, for that comment. And it's really wonderful, isn't it, how we comment from our own life practices that we've been doing over the years. When you talk about nothingness, I think it's very good to think of it in terms of no thingness. So there's not a thing, meaning an ideal permanent thing that you can find anywhere. When you say that something doesn't exist, it's like the thing cannot be found. But there's the constant process of causation, sort of like a flow of phenomena that we experience, which is always determined by causation and going on and on from through the passage of time. And but when you speak about existential anxiety, so yes, the organism wants to continue its existence as a living organism, and that mission is doomed to failure because every living organism will fail to be able to continue its existence. And it's because of that doom that then some people think that why humans or why beings, I don't know about animals, but why humans concocted the ideas about heaven, because they just couldn't imagine that this life would actually come to its end. I think that there's another aspect of it, which is about clinging to status and position. So if when we can put like a label on our status or our position, then it sort of like becomes a thing and becomes more like a reliable. And so some people feel a lot more comfortable if they have a fixed status, which is secure. So like, for example, when two people get married and they say, I'm the wife and that's the husband, and we've made this promise, and so we're going to be together. And then, they could temporarily feel really good about it. And then another couple might say, we're going to be together, but we choose not to get married because we're just going to try to make it good every day, to make the process good without needing to have the label. So people get a lot of anxiety about their status, and all the wars and political trouble and so much in the world is about status anxiety. And we don't, I think it's the same kind of thing. Like, I want to be high class, I'm I don't know what, I'm working class, I'm white, I'm American, I'm a bhikkhuni, all of these labels, and that is got something to do with that existential anxiety being somewhat temporarily
Yeah, it's
covered over.
yeah, it's an attempt, but when you actually really feel it, it doesn't go away, and there isn't any way you can code it.
Right, and it doesn't work.
And it doesn't work, obviously. I mean, that's the paradox. You're fully aware that it is totally delusional and not going to work, and it's still there in your DNA, trying to make something.
Yeah.
Trying to make a thing when there isn't a thing. So yeah.
Patipada, you have a hand up?
Yes. One of the things that I've become aware of is that no one has ever done anything to anyone. And looking at the history of my life and all of the pain and suffering I have created in believing that someone has done something to hurt me has resulted in a great deal of suffering for myself, me creating a great deal of suffering for myself. So this attempt to develop right view and study and practice results in a clarification of perspective on life experiences. And so getting to the point where no one has ever done anything to anyone also makes me realize that the karmic imprint of the past can flow like energy into this form. And so ancestors' experiences can flow into this form. And once we're able to see that every being that has ever lived connected to this form exists in this form, and just accept that, then we see that there is historical and ancestral memory in it. And that's the only thing that plays games with the mind. And so when I got to that point, I realized there's never anything to worry about, and nobody's ever doing anything to me. Just pay attention to the thoughts. Pay attention to the mind. What is it doing with those thoughts? Because that's all it is. There's absolutely nothing more. That is just my experience during my meditation retreat at the monastery.
Thank you for that comment, Patipada. It's this really ties in with one of the things I said earlier, that like a person who's enlightened or realized, no matter what is done to them or said to them, they don't take harm from it because of their realization. And so through your practice and your life experience, you've come to some kind of a level of realization. So things that were done to you before are things that are done to you, things that are done that touch your experience, that you don't take harm from that. You're not the victim of those things. And it's kind of a koan or a puzzle, isn't it? At the same time, the mind becomes so clear about not having any intention to cause a harm, whether internally or externally.
Right.
That you would not wish to harm a worm or anybody. And so those two things, like the intention of non-harming, is both not harming another, but at the same time you realize that harming another is actually sort of like not quite the true way of putting it, because with your realization,
there's no self to harm either.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
It's like the way, dukkha is given as an impersonal, universal process, the Four Noble Truths. And just the same way, this idea of non-harming or of what's a skillful and unskillful behavior is kind of like universal and impersonal. It's not really about individuals helping and harming other individuals. There's something it's different.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Ayya.
So I know that we've gone over our time. I'm happy to stay and keep conversing, but if somebody has a need to go, I will understand. Ren, your comment or your question?
Yeah, well, just a very quick one. Back to what Ananaya brought up about this existential anxiety. I think that just hit the nail, on the head, which is like sometimes I feel, yes, open and it's okay, I get it, everything is okay and good, I'm at peace. And then this notion of, survival, I'm me, I need to protect this creature keeps coming back because it's just so core, right? So I fluctuate between that. And I'm just thinking, wow, and if that's indeed the natural instinct for every living creature, then to go this other route is maybe not that natural. And that's why it's hard. And I wonder, the journey or the path of going there. I mean, what must it have taken to be there, to stay there, not just be there and then back and forth and back and forth.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's amazing what was realized by the Sammasambuddha. And it's kind of amazing realizing that humans are able to go beyond our genetic instincts, and that we truly have the ability to go beyond and to realize a level of freedom from compulsion, freedom from anxiety, freedom from affliction as a result of these beautiful teachings. I think I have to wrap up this conversation for today, and I will mention that next week, this week coming, we're having the full moon, which is the beginning of the Vesak season, and so we'll have a month of looking into teachings that are touching on the birth, the full enlightenment, and the final parinibbana of the Buddha, our teacher, the Blessed One, who gave us these wonderful practices. So I think that may be enough for today.
Your retreat?
Oh, I'm giving a retreat on the May 12 to 14. It's a Zoom retreat. It's on the announcement that we sent out. It's about the destruction of the taints or destruction of some defilements. This is a synonym or an epithet for a full awakening. So all of this, what frustrates ourselves, our clinging, our irritability, our greed, our anxiety, all of those things were finally cut loose by the Buddha or by any fully enlightened one. And I want to explore what that means, not to make you feel guilty because you don't think you'll do it this year, but instead to provide like an inspiration and aspiration to energize your practice to think, we can go further along this way for the final destruction of the taints, or what I like to call it the Kinasava, the one who has their defilements destroyed. That's on the 12th to the 14th. Welcome to look at the Buddha image, which is there on the little screen, or the Buddha that you have in your house. Araham Samma Sambuddho Bhagava Buddhang Bhagavantam Abhivademi. Savakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammam Namasami. Supatipanno Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Sangham Namami. Thank you, everybody, for your practice and your participation.
Thank you, Ayya.
Thank you, Ayya. Thank you very much. Sadhu,
Thank you very much.
sadhu.
Thank you.